to the Dignity Dialogue with your host, Joe Kittinger.
Welcome back to another Dignity Dialogue. I am Joe Kittinger. I'm here with April Strom-Johnson.
Hello.
And we have a special guest, Ryan Martin. And Ryan is at UWGB, that's University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, for those of you not local. He is a psychology professor, and he's done a lot of research on the subject of anger. What's healthy anger? What's unhealthy anger? And when you mentioned, Ryan, in our pre-talk about healthy anger, I shared with you I didn't even know there was such a thing, that you can have healthy anger. So I'm just really fascinated about emotions because we do a lot of work in that, and you've committed your career to it. So
Right.
set us up on just more of what you do in the psychology world, and then the subject of anger.
Yeah, you bet. So I'll back up and just say I'm an anger researcher. I've been studying anger for officially since 1999, but honestly, even before that.
Sure.
1999 was when I went to graduate school, and specifically with the intent of studying anger. And I think I went into it kind of thinking along the lines of anger isn't necessarily good for us, and we want to try and minimize it. We want to try and decrease its impact. And over the last 23 years, I guess, if I'm doing the math correctly, I think I've learned that my initial take was wrong. Anger is, of course, there are all sorts of ways in which anger can interfere in our lives and can cause problems for us and those around us. But ultimately, anger, like any emotion, is good for us. It's healthy. It's one of the ways that our brain essentially alerts us to the fact that we've been wronged somehow. And then it energizes us to confront that injustice. And so just like a lot of other emotions, that fear alerts us to danger, energizes us to deal with that threat. Sadness alerts us to loss. Anger lets us know, hey, someone is messing with you. Someone is causing you problems. Something is getting in your way. And then it gives us the energy we need to deal with whatever that something is. And so that's really, in a lot of my work then becomes about understanding, why do people get angry? What are some of the, not just the circumstances, but what's going on in them that leads to that anger? And then what do they do with it? How do they express it? And that's where I think, what they do with it is the part that can get in the way and cause problems.
Okay, what they do with it. And also, is that anger coming from a place of truth or fiction? We talk about that. Is that, you hear people, I can't believe they did this, and you're telling someone else, they're like, what'd they do? That didn't seem like it's a big deal. Oh, no, they mean this. And it's like what? How do you know if it's in your head or if it's justified, I guess? I don't know if that's the right word to say.
This is so I have a story for this.
Yes,
so,
thank you. We love stories.
Yes. So honestly, about 20 years ago, I was bowling with a friend, and we went up to pay at the end of the night, and he gave the guy a $20 bill, and the guy gave him change as though he had given him a $10 bill. And the interaction went like this: "Oh, I think I gave you a 20 from my friend." And the guy said, "Oh, my bad," and gave him $10. I thought that was the end of it, right? I thought, simple mistake, everybody move on. We went to a bar afterwards, having a few drinks, and my friend is continuing to fume. And he's all of a sudden, he's like, "God, I can't believe that guy did that." And I said, what are you talking about? He said, I can't believe he tried to screw me like that. He tried to trick me. And I said, well, wait, what? And so we had same interaction that I had watched, that he had witnessed, totally different and completely different interpretation of what happened. Right. In his mind, this guy was trying to take advantage of me. He was trying to trick me. He was trying to steal from me. What I perceived as a simple mistake, he perceived as an attack. And not just, in his mind, he'd even twisted it. To be fair, I suppose there's a possibility I am wrong, right? That he
the guy was out to get him.
That the guy was out to get him. I think that's probably far-fetched, but maybe. But in his mind, he had sort of tweaked this to be, not only was this guy trying to take advantage of me, but he was doing so because he thought I was weak, right? He thought I was easily manipulated, easily taken advantage of. And so it's sort of a window into what you're talking about. Are we reacting to fact or fiction? And you see it, we can broaden this out to politics. We can broaden
for
it out
sure.
to a gajillion other things. That people are reacting potentially to misinformation as they are emoting.
Well, isn't it just like getting cut off while driving?
Yep. Yeah.
I mean, your brain goes, they've wronged you, man. They've been studying you for the last 2 weeks, and they know exactly when you get to the intersection, they're going to cut you off. Well, now they deserve you, son of a. It's like we go from 0 to 100 on the anger on the anger scale. And that's the first place I practiced, actually, my anger management, which reminds me of the movie Anger Management. Have you seen Anger Management?
It's been a while, but
Who were the stars in that?
Jack Nicholson.
And is it Adam Sandler?
I'm blanking. It might be Adam Sandler. Yes,
that's who I think it was. Yeah.
And one of them was the teacher, and one of them was the guy getting angry all the time.
Yeah, I think the premise was that Adam Sandler had to go to anger management therapy. Jack Nicholson was the therapist.
Who gets angry.
Who messes with him a lot. But I think the discovery is actually, to the point we're talking about, I think that the result is that Adam Sandler wasn't necessarily getting angry enough or about the right things.
Yeah.
And so that he had some things to gain. But again, it's been a while.
It just reminds me of that movie.
It's a personal favorite of mine.
Yes.
All right.
Well, I picked that movie one year. I won't get into the details.
Okay.
But one year I picked that movie to go to as a birthday present, and so a bunch of gals that I knew, and they were all quite disappointed in my choice. In fact, a few of them left.
Oh no!
Just a bit into the movie, and a few more left about halfway through the movie.
Okay.
But there were a few of us that stuck it out for the whole thing, and I learned a few things from that movie, and the reactions of people.
I think all those movies are based on some sort of psychology.
Absolutely,
right? They're trying to make fun of sometimes, but there's a lot of truth to it.
There is an amazing. Even if you're not going to watch the movie, there's an amazing group therapy scene where he is asked to introduce himself, and he's not doing it the way the therapist wants him to, and the therapist keeps sort of keeps saying to him essentially, well, no, that's what you do. We don't want to know what you do. We want to know who you are, and he just doesn't know how to answer, and it's great. It's a great scene.
So when we go into psychology, certainly. With a lot of leadership, a lot of wonderful leaders that we work with, and you pull out their story in life, right? And you hear stories of where maybe someone is triggered in anger more than others due to just their upbringing, due to lessons they learned from their parents. And so you just remember, people are out to get you, like these programs that are put in us from our upbringing. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about you can think about anger in two ways, right? You can think of it as the way we've been talking about it, the emotion that we all feel, right? But then there's also a way of thinking about anger as a personality trait, right? That there are some people who are angrier than others, right? People who are triggered more often, people whose anger is more extreme or intense, or even who express it in sort of negative ways more often, and so forth. And when we think about it in that way, if we start thinking about it as a personality trait, we see that we can start to look at some of those causes you're talking about. Some of it is, a big piece of it is upbringing, and it's the modeling we saw. How is anger expressed by my caregivers as like sort of a golden rule of emotional expression is kids tend to do what their parents do or their caregivers do when they express their emotions. So if I've got a mom or dad who yell and scream, then I am likely to yell and scream when I get angry. And of course, there's wiggle room within that, but that tends to be an approach. There's also some, brain structures that are relevant. Our capacity for impulse control is rooted in particular regions of the brain. How emotionally reactive we are is rooted in particular areas of the brain, and so forth. But a big part of it is how we learn to interpret the world around us. And so the worldview that we take into our day-to-day interactions. And so if my approach to the world is that I see people as fundamentally untrustworthy and people who are out there to take advantage of me, maybe even to shortchange me at a bowling alley, if that's my worldview, then I'm likely to get angry more often. Or if I tend to feel maybe a little out of control at times, like the world is chaotic and messy, well, those routine frustrations we all experience, they're more overwhelming to me, and I catastrophize those outcomes. Getting stuck in traffic is worse for me than it is for someone else because the world is an overwhelming place, that I can't handle.
Wow, I love that idea. That this idea of chaos, and we talk about chaos quite a bit in a lot of our trainings and our curriculum, and one thing that I have picked up on people who have gone through a lot of chaos, there doesn't really seem to be a middle ground with people who have gone through chaos. Either the world around them is just more difficult, it's more heightened, the cutoff, right, is more heightened for them due to that chaos, or they have come through chaos so much so that they see that the chaos means nothing to what they can choose to see, understand, grow from, look at, from challenges to opportunities, those kinds of things. There's really no middle ground that I've noticed with people that I've worked with that have come through really chaotic upbringings.
Yeah, and I think it's rooted in I think a lot of that is rooted in a person's ability or belief in their ability to cope. And so when we experience any kind of stressor, we do two things, and there's what we call primary appraisal and secondary appraisal. Primary appraisal is when you're evaluating like the source of that stressor, right? The person who cut you off in traffic, or the catastrophic thing that you're dealing with, right? And we decide like whose fault is it? Why did this happen? We make decisions like that. And in the context of anger, we think things like, is this blameworthy? Is this punishable? Stuff like that. But then the second piece, the secondary appraisal, is exactly what you're talking about. It's, can I cope with this? How bad is this? And my belief in my ability to cope with those stressors is rooted in the stuff I've gone through and what I've been able to successfully get through before, or what I haven't been able to get through successfully. And maybe it's not even a question of, can I get through this, but a question of, why do I have to go through this, right? I've been through so much already. Why do I have to do this again? And when we decide, I can't cope with this, or this is too catastrophic, we get angry, we get sad, we get scared. I talk a lot about anger, obviously, but these emotions don't happen in a vacuum, right? We feel lots of things.
It tumbles into many emotions.
Yep, exactly.
Well, that's fascinating. I'm trying to think. You said in the beginning, what is it? Where does it come from? And what do you do when you're feeling this way? What do you do when you're feeling that way?
Yeah. So anger is inherently, in fact, you could even almost define it as an emotional desire to lash out, right? When we get angry, we want to lash out. And that we don't have to, though. And that's the thing. And oftentimes we don't. I mean, that's the interesting thing. I think most people can sort of think about the last time they were angry or the last couple times they were angry and recognize, I didn't yell, I didn't scream, I didn't hit anybody, I didn't push anybody. I got angry and I felt it, and maybe I pounded my hand on my fist on the table, or maybe I said something under my breath, but I didn't do anything harmful to anyone.
Yeah.
And so it's like we have that natural instinct, and that's rooted in, I would argue, our evolutionary history. I mean, that's why when I say it exists and energizes us to confront injustice, that's what our ancestors, especially our non-human ancestors, that's what they did when they were angry, is they lashed out, And so, but we have the capacity for executive function, right? We can,
like that.
Yeah, we can think about what we want to do, and we can make different decisions, and we can decide, you know what, I'm angry right now, I'm gonna protest this decision, right? I'm angry right now, I'm gonna write a letter to the editor. I'm angry right now, I'm gonna solve whatever the problem is that keeps happening that's leading to this anger. I'm angry right now, I'm gonna go play the piano for a little while, or I'm going to go do yoga, or I'm going to find some way to spread, write poetry, journal, talk to a friend, seek social support in some other way. I'm going to go sit in my room and cry, right? These are all things we can choose to do and some of those are the right thing to do. And people on the podcast don't know I just used air quotes, but
No, we're filming this.
Okay, good.
They can see
Good.
you.
Yeah. Well, good. The right thing to do when you're angry is always contextual. It depends on who you're with and the circumstances, and there's probably more than one right thing to do in any given moment. But to try and channel that anger into something positive and productive, something that's going to leave you and other people around you in a better position than they otherwise would have been, and that is like any emotion. That's the art to using it effectively.
Let me ask you a question right where you were, which just kind of sparked a thought in my mind. This idea of having that choice of doing something that's positive or doing kind of that right, I did air quotes now too, that right thing when you're angry. I feel like maybe as a society, and maybe that's too broad, but it feels like as a society, we've made the conclusion that to do the right thing is to not address it. And so it's okay for you to make me angry, or and I sometimes will also talk about, like, we choose how we're going to feel about something. Somebody doesn't make me mad. Yep. I'm choosing to be mad, based on what that person has said or done or whatever that might be. That it's a choice that I have. But this idea of doing the right thing or doing a positive thing, we connect positive with not doing anything with it, or keeping it, or finding your own personal way to kind of deal with it, and not really addressing the thing that continually makes you angry. And I'm not sure that I agree with that.
And I don't agree with it either. I think we're both I suspect we're on the same page here, but yes, yeah.
How is it, what is that how do you help people find that balance between not just kind of taking it in and taking it in all the time, and not necessarily lashing out?
Yep.
Yeah. So the happy medium of saying something in a productive way.
Way.
Yeah.
And I think that is the key, is sort of what is going to get me to the outcome I want, right? So if I'm dealing with something that is unfair or unjust, and I am being treated in a way that is unfair, you're absolutely right, and it's making me angry. You're absolutely right. I don't think the right thing to do in that moment is to just take it. I think we have a right to, I'm going to say, fight back, even though I don't necessarily mean the word fight in an aggressive physical way, but we have a right to respond to that. And so I think the question is, and this is what I mean by context, I think the question then becomes, what is the best way in this particular circumstance to use that anger to change this situation, to right this injustice? And it might be a very assertive response to whoever the person is about how they don't have the right to treat you that way, and I guess I wouldn't necessarily define that as lashing out, but maybe it is, it's and so I think, to me, it's about finding a way to use that anger to solve whatever the problem is, or right whatever that injustice is. To even back up further, though, because I think your point is so important about sort of how society views anger and what people should do. And I agree with you that that society has sort of said, no, people need to, you need to maintain, to sort of maintain societal equilibrium, and you need to not express that anger and hold it in. I would also argue that it differs by group, that our expectations of some groups are different than they are other groups. And so we have research that says that men, especially white men who express anger, they are perceived as more competent for that. We have similar research that says that women who express anger in an outward way are perceived as less competent afterwards. And so the expectations differ considerably based on who the person is who is expressing anger. This is something that for Marvel fans, the new She-Hulk show handled beautifully. I really thought that became a really interesting way, and that they took this character. So if you've been watching it, you know what I'm talking about. It's a really interesting way that she acknowledges, look, I've had to control my anger my entire life in ways that you, Bruce, haven't. I'm already pretty good at this.
Okay.
So it becomes essentially, in some ways, her superpower is that ability to manage things.
Okay.
Marvel has made bazillions
Yes.
on this idea of anger.
Yep. Yeah.
Right.
And so many of their characters.
Yep.
That's so right. Like their magical power comes out when they're angry.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
But I think it's something that so many people relate to.
Mm-hmm.
They go, oh my gosh, I totally relate to that character.
Right. Yep.
You know?
Talk to us about the research on anger damaging the body. I think you mentioned, health. Probably, I'm guessing, sustained anger.
Yep. Yeah. So the research here is fascinating, and it dates back to something I'm guessing all of your listeners and viewers are familiar with, and it's the quote unquote type A personality, or what was at the time called type A behavior pattern.
Okay.
Basically says people who are competitive, people who are hostile, people who are aggressive, impatient, that they tend to suffer cardiovascular problems. And rooted in that description is, of course, people who get angry, right? In fact, anger appears to be the mechanism by which the type A people were suffering those cardiovascular problems, because that's the thing that's elevating their heart rate. It's the thing that's,
Restricting capillaries.
Yep, all
that stuff.
Yep. So we know that we've known that for a long time. Anger is associated with cardiovascular problems, especially when it's chronic and extreme. But it's more than that. It's associated with muscle tension. It's associated with not just muscle tension, but chronic headaches, chronic pain. It's associated with all sorts of unhealthy behaviors that people use to cope with that anger. So smoking, drinking, even some reckless driving, things like that tend to have these negative health outcomes. So chronic anger associated with all sorts of these problems. But then here's what's even worse.
Great.
Yes.
What's the good news?
Yeah. So it's associated with angry people tend to alienate their social support networks.
Sure.
And so they drive people away who could potentially help them.
Sure.
And again, when I say angry people, I'm talking about, I started this by saying anger can be good for us. And now here I'm talking about all the negatives. But it's people who express their anger in particular alienating ways. It's the people who yell. It's the people who scream. It's the people who don't necessarily control it effectively or channel it into effective things.
Well, it's like, they say a glass of wine can be good for your heart. A bottle of wine, not so much.
Right. I've been testing that theory in my own way. So, yeah.
Me too. And I got to tell you, I think
it's spot on.
It's healthy.
I think it's spot on.
Excellent.
That's great.
So it is controlling. Obviously, I would think in your research, if I had to choose whether to live an angry life or a non-angry life, the vast data would show that it's probably better to be calm.
Yep.
Right? To be able to manage the anger. That the anger on the good side, if I'm interpreting you right, and please correct me if I'm not, because this is fascinating to me. On the good side, anger is a mechanism to say something's not right.
Yep.
That's the good side.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's a warning. It's like, hey, check this out. On the bad side is don't allow the emotion of anger to be your solution. Like,
Right.
Think through, there's an injustice, get curious.
Mm-hmm.
How can I address this? I thought, have you seen the Falwell documentary?
I've heard about it and I'd like to see it.
Oh
but
my
yeah.
gosh, it's crazy. And if it wasn't, I don't read tabloid magazines, but this is like a big deal where the whole Falwell organization went down due to this sex scandal, basically. Mm-hmm. And this young man who was almost like, he was 20 years old, baited into this family to do these, and he did it on his own choice, but they're flying him all around, making him feel super important. He meets Trump. He's all over the place. And he got super angry when they started to throw him under the proverbial bus and there's lawsuit. You have to watch the whole thing. Yeah. And so he's like, I just, he was thinking of, just ending it all, right? And his sister, the voice of support, said, use that anger to make it right, to tell your story, which is super vulnerable.
Right.
Super vulnerable. So he paused, took his anger, and as you're telling me the story, I'm like, that is a classic example of doing something that's very uncomfortable to right an injustice. That is clearly an injustice that he experienced.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm familiar with the show. I haven't watched it yet, but I've heard great things. I think it sounds like what you're describing. Absolutely right on. I mean, there are ways, and we could look throughout history and look to examples of people using their anger to right injustices, and sometimes in some ways large sort of systemic issues, and then some cases individual issues like this, right? A person saying, even something as simple as, I'm trying to print this document and my printer won't work, and I get frustrated,
right.
And then that frustration is the thing that motivates me to replace it, right, or fix the printer, right? These little sort of microcosms of our anger actually influencing us to do a good thing.
Yeah.
Question: You just mentioned this, and we talked a little bit about. There's this feelings wheel, for example, right? We use the feelings wheel in some of our curriculum. And this idea that anger is a word that we often use to express a lot of other feelings that we don't necessarily give words to, right? And so, like you just said, you get frustrated when the printer doesn't work, right? I get frustrated when the printer doesn't work here at work, But for some, the only word that they have, the only word they think that they can use is anger, mad,
right?
Being mad or angry, right? When we start to dig into that idea and we look at it and we say, well, is it anger that, or is it disappointment?
Right.
And I use a phrase sometimes, I have a hard time speaking to anger. It's hard for me to talk to anger, but it's not as hard for me to talk to disappointed or to talk to frustrated. Is there a sense that anger is kind of this big giant umbrella that a lot of things sit under, and the easy answer is to just go to anger, but really you're feeling a lot of other emotions in the midst of that really is not anger.
Yep. So let's trying to think about the best way to say it. Have you seen Inside Out?
Yes, I love it.
Okay. So it's great. So one of the things I like, I love the movie Inside Out, and I think it's a beautiful metaphor for kids to develop that emotional literacy. And one of the things that I think is really interesting about Inside Out is, they brought in an emotion researcher, a very famous emotion researcher named Paul Ekman to do this. And to be a consultant for them. And one of the things they talked about is that Ekman has in his work essentially established, interestingly, normally 6, but for some reason in that movie just 5, basic emotions. And they are the 5 we see in that movie, plus surprise is another one. Now, he's expanded that list over his career, so it includes some other emotions. But what we can think of in some ways is that these are what we call the basics or the core. They start early in life. We see infants and toddlers starting to develop them. And then as we grow, our emotions, more advanced emotions, more sophisticated feelings, they grow out of those, right? They grow through so we start to experience things like guilt and shame and embarrassment, these things that kind of come from combinations of these different emotional states. And they develop partially because we develop cognitively, right? If I don't know that there are people out in the world sort of judging me, I can't feel embarrassed. Like it requires me to have a theory of mind in order to get there. I've got to know that there are other people have minds and might judge me. So what I'm getting at with all of this is that under that, I think there are these sort of, there's an anger umbrella. I think there's sort of these 5 or 6 umbrellas that have all of these different feelings underneath them. And sometimes they're sort of under the anger umbrella. Sometimes they're under the discussed umbrella. Sometimes they're blends of multiple umbrellas. They all exist. The thing that is so important to me, and one of the things that I really want for people, is to continue to develop that emotional language and their emotional literacy skills so that they can better put words to those feelings. And so they can start to understand the difference between feeling angry and feeling hurt, and or feeling, I mean, to your point, anger and disappointed, right? That, like, there's a difference between I was wronged and I didn't get what I wanted.
Right.
And maybe those could overlap, but they might be separate. And sometimes people don't get what they wanted and they say, well, that's not fair. But it was actually perfectly fair. You're just disappointed, right? You just wanted something different. And it makes sense to feel sad in that moment. It makes sense to feel jealous of somebody else who did get what they wanted. It makes, like, those are natural feelings too. But I do think you're absolutely right that people might gravitate towards this one because they don't necessarily have the language to speak to it. And frankly, it may feel easier for them to feel rage than it does to admit they're disappointed or they're hurt, that it might feel easier for them to just be mad.
I used the feeling wheel for the first time, like in a real life situation. Like we train, and we certainly didn't invent the feelings wheel. It's out there on the internet. We have just an amazing foreign exchange student from Brazil staying with us, and what does every high school kid in America and in the world want to visit when they're here? Walt Disney World.
Oh, that was going to be my guess, but I was
Walt Disney World.
I was worried
kid.
I was worried my answer wasn't sophisticated enough. I was like Smithsonian.
No, Disney World.
Okay.
And so we decided to take her for a long weekend with our other teenage girls. So she's a teenager. For just a long weekend. Allegiant is so easy out of Appleton. You just fly there and fly back. And when I got home from work the day before we were leaving, so we're going to leave early Thursday morning. This is like, 5 o'clock on Friday, 5:30. I have two girls, one being our little foreign exchange student who calls me dad, who I find out she's not feeling well. And then my daughter Ari is not feeling well, right? So cold. We're in the cold season. So I go up and check on both of them. And I know Ari very well, being my daughter, that she's kind of like, tape an aspirin to it, let's go. She's that kind of a girl. Like, I'm fine, I'll COVID test myself, and then if I'm good, let's go. And she was fine that way. And but little Sophia, she just would cry, and her eyes were bright red. So I'm thinking she has pink eye, right? And so I'm looking at my watch. It's 7 o'clock, and my wife says, I think should you take her to urgent care? We're flying out tomorrow at 7. Like, how are we going to get any sort of, relief? So I'm like, yeah. So by the time I get her down, we arrive at instant care at 7:30, and she is just sobbing. And she is just sobbing and sobbing. The doctor is looking at her eye and then prescribes her. She goes, I think you clearly have that, and we're going to give you this little, go to Walmart, stays open till 9 and blah, blah, blah. We're going through. She's sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. And we're walking around Walmart. She's sobbing and sobbing. And I went to the feelings wheel. And so I said, what are you feeling right now? Are you feeling anger? You're not happy.
Right. Yeah,
Are you feeling this? Are you feeling that?
That's out.
And what we isolated was that she felt bad, like she's going to ruin our vacation. So she felt guilt for being sick. And so the feeling wheel really helped her to express to me so that I could console her, right? To tell her, this just happens. We're all good. We're all taken care of. You said in 24 hours, you're going to be just fine, Helping to express emotions is like critical.
Being able to understand, I mean, we started out, I think maybe it was off air, but we started out talking about emotional intelligence. And there's lots of different definitions, but the definition I tend to subscribe to is being able to sort of understand, manage, use emotion, and perceive emotions effectively. And I think the ability to perceive emotions in ourselves and in others is this critical life skill. And it is such an important part of emotion literacy to really know what you are feeling, to really know as a dad what your kids are feeling, and be able to identify that and help them see it it's such an important skill, because that's where the resolution comes from. I mean, if you don't know what you're feeling, it's hard to fix whatever the problem is.
And we know that comes from a part of our brain that doesn't process language.
Right.
That's the limbic system. And so it doesn't process language. So how do I express even how much I love a person? Well, I go to Hallmark. I need their help. I'd like to just kind of wrap up with referring to Dr. Donna Hicks. Are you familiar with Dr. Donna Hicks?
Say more, because the name sounds familiar, but I'm...
Okay, her specialty is in dignity.
Okay.
So I think she's the only person, I mean, she wrote a book on dignity, and now her latest book is Leading with Dignity.
Okay.
And so we have had conversations around it, and what really got me fascinated is she got her PhD from University UW-Madison.
Okay.
Okay, her PhD work, and she has helped Palestinians and
like some different tribes.
Yeah, like tribes. Like she's working with Bishop Tutu.
Yeah. Nice.
Just in Israelis, I should say, whose families were very brutal to each other. The next generation help use dignity to help them bridge. I mean, she's done some amazing work with dignity, and she writes that dignity violations. So I do something that triggers something in you. Dignity violations are equivalent. Your body responds physiologically as if someone was attacking you with a knife. She said, in our research, we showed no difference in what happens to a person when they're physically being attacked. Blood pressure goes up, heart rate goes up, eyes dilate, capillaries restrict, whatever, all the, sweat, whatever all that physical responses to dignity violations. And so we had the opportunity to, I had a conversation with her, and I showed her Dignify, and she said when those are triggered, it prompts an anger or a fear mechanism.
Right. Yeah.
So when you can talk about it logically, it changes the conversation. Identifying the emotions changes the conversation. I think that's what really needs to happen, and perhaps does happen in your work, helping people look at emotions more logically so that they can respond differently next time. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that one is to be able to fully, to the best that you can, understand where this emotion is coming from. Emotions are different than what I would call drives. But, when I feel hungry, which I consider a drive, when I feel thirsty, I know what to do to fix it, right? Yeah. It's like, okay, it's my body's way of telling me I need to eat or get something to drink. Yeah. And our emotions, even though they're different than those drives, they serve a similar purpose. It's your body's way, it's your brain's way of telling you something's off, and let's figure out how to fix it. But you can't do that unless you know where it's coming from and what's really causing it. And those causes are really complex. And so trying to figure out what's the best way to solve this problem it's critically important to success.
I love that. It's so interesting to think of the idea of, if I can understand a little bit more about emotions and why you're feeling that emotion, what that might be, right? It's also less chance that I'm going to assume that it's me.
Yep.
As well. And so many people take on the blame for somebody else's emotions. You're upset about something. It must be me. I must have done something. And I know my husband and I work a lot with married couples and young couples right after they get married, and we talk about that a lot. But I'd never really kind of made the connection of this idea of, why is it that you always think it's you? And part of that is just nobody really wants to say that might be something in the other person. Why are you feeling that emotion? Where is that coming from? And just the more that we talk about our emotions, the more that we can kind of get a hold of it, I think, before it gets to anger. We get a lot of things before we get to, I'm just so mad. I'm just, I just love this idea of coming into a place where you can understand it and maybe even anticipate a little bit of what that might be before having the conversation of, what did I do? And why is it me? You know, and things like that seem so extreme.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is it's really coming way back, stepping way back, and looking at it from that very integral part. And it's really neat. I'm kind of fascinated by it.
Right.
Yeah. This is great. Well, Ryan, you've been awesome. Thank you for your time today. Really focusing on this idea of anger. What is it? What do you do with it? It's something that everyone struggles at some level with it, and it's comforting to know that some level of it is okay, right? It's not your fault.
Yeah,
it's part of who you are. If folks are interested in maybe having you speak on the subject, or what, do you provide anything outside of the college that folks should be aware of?
Yeah, so I have, I guess the one-stop shop for this would be to go to alltheragescience.com, which is my website. I have a book called Why We Get Mad that people can check out, and I've got another book coming out in May called Dealing with Angry People. The only other thing is I am all over social media, so if you find I am at Anger Professor, and you can find me on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Those are places to check out more about this, and you can get in touch with me via any of those mechanisms too.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure
Awesome.
having you with us, and it's cool having you right here in Green Bay to stop by and do this in person. So this is Ryan Martin, and I'm Joe. This is April. This is another episode of the Dignity Dialogue. Have a great week.
Everybody.
This has been the Dignity Dialogue with Joe Kittinger. Talk at you later.